Rob Chesnut, thank you for joining me. You are the Chief Ethics Officer for Airbnb, and you've written a book that is about to come out called Intentional Integrity. And at a time like this, integrity is needed more than ever, is it not?
I think so. I think it's integrity is not a luxury that you can pay attention to when times are good. And I think that in times like this, uh, your character as a person, I think, and as a company get tested and revealed. So I think it's particularly important.
What happens if we start to lose a sense of what we consider to be important guidelines in the way that we functioned prior to this crisis and go, oh, well, the rules have been rewritten, so I can act differently. What happens to us if we don't maintain those rules and guidelines that we've put in place as a society over time to get us to where we are today?
Yeah, I think we probably need to do better. I think one point in the book is that we had not been paying sufficient attention to that sort of thing even before this crisis. But I think in a time of crisis, there may be some temptations to get away from those rules. So this is what great leadership's about, right? It's about keeping people focused on things like that are important, because we otherwise think you can get off the rails with everybody doing what they feel is in their self-interest and justifying it. I think in ways that can be damaging to all of us.
In your book, you talk about the 6 C's that make up the foundation of a company's policy with regarding integrity. And I think that if you don't mind sort of going through with me a little bit, some of those. And the most important one, I guess, at the beginning is that it starts at the top. It starts with the chief executive officer. Why does it have to start there?
Yeah, well, there's really no need to embark on a campaign of having integrity in your culture if the top of the company doesn't buy into it. In fact, if you're an HR professional or a legal professional, and you want to make this part of your company's culture, realize that if the top leadership doesn't buy in, then you're just going to look like a hypocrite at the end of the day, because the tone at a company is set at the top. People know the way that the leaders behave, whether it's day to day in the office or at holiday parties or when there's a crunch at the end of a quarter to hit a number. And you've got to have the leadership bought into the idea that integrity is an important part of your culture, or you really won't get anywhere. But if the CEO and if the board is bought into it, great things I think are possible, and it can actually supercharge your business. Without it, there's no need to even think about it.
So in moments like this, of course, our principles and our values really are tested. They no longer are words, because we have to make some very difficult decisions around following the rules. Rules that you might say, well, nobody's going to pay attention, or who's ever going to get around to this, and maybe this is a way of us sneaking through. How much more important is it that we pay attention to those standards that we've set before?
Well, more important than ever. This is where some of the work hopefully is paid off if you've worked for years at a company to drive this home. I think it's hard to establish integrity as part of your culture when you're working remotely in crisis. The time to do it is when business is going well, or when things are operating normally. Times like this are when it's tested. I think a message for companies now is you've got it as part of, if you've got it as part of your culture, you've got a real advantage. You've got to make sure you continue to stick with it and drive it.
If you do have that code of conduct, which is your 2nd C, is this a good time to reiterate that and share it with your team? Because I guess that comes into the communications part of it as well, one of the other 6 Cs.
Right. At too many places, a code of ethics is something that a law firm gives you, and you email it out, tell everybody to check a box saying they've read it, and that's all you ever hear of it. or maybe you download it off the internet, stick your own logo on it, and send it out. That's not the way to drive integrity into the culture of your company. Everybody sees through that you're just checking a box from a compliance perspective. A good effective code is something that's actually written in the language of the company that reflects the culture of the company, and it ideally gets input from different groups in the company to make sure that it reflects the norms. A code that works at one company doesn't necessarily work at another company. So it needs to be something that's really yours. And then once you've got it, just sending it out isn't sufficient. You actually have to talk about it, and you have to engage in a regular course of communication about it. I was talking to Adam Silver at the NBA. I spent some time with him one day. I've got a lot of respect for him as a leader. And he told me that he thinks of integrity messages like advertising in television. Run one ad and nobody will pay attention. Run a series of ads. Run a campaign. Drive a specific theme and a message over time in multiple channels. That's how you get an impact. That's how you get something ingrained. So again, now more than ever, you've got remote workforces. There are going to be certain aspects of the code, I think, that are particularly important. Good time to emphasize and highlight those parts.
One of your C's is to make sure that you have a clear reporting system so that if there are violations that are identified, that there is a clear process to deal with that. In society as a whole, we're used to saying, well, part of that reporting system is that I can phone the police, or I can phone some authority or report to some authority. I know this steps a little bit outside of the corporate intention of your book, but as we're in this crisis right now where people are now starting to worry about close personal contact, does this not challenge the police in having to be able to respond to some of these calls? And how then, I guess, as individuals, and I know I'm hypothesizing right now, how then as individuals do we find our way through this to make sure that people are maintaining ethical practices?
Well, all of us play a role, and that's whether we're a member of a community or a member of a company. People, I write in the book that integrity is contagious, but so is a lack of integrity. People will act in a particular way, and this is something science teaches us. They will act in ways that will make them feel good about themselves. And they may fudge, they may do things that bend the rules or break the rules if they feel like other people are doing it, or that it's okay because the rule doesn't specifically address this. So we're all quite good at rationalizing our own behavior and fudging in ways that may benefit us. So this is, again, leadership plays a big role here. People look to leaders. And if leaders step up, follow the rules, and model the right kind of behavior, then other people understand that that's what's expected of them. And that's what they need to do too. If they see that others around them are not following the rules, bending the rules, then they feel like it's okay too. So, when you're dealing with a time of crisis like this, be a role model. And by doing that, your actions can be contagious and encourage other people to do the same thing. If you bend the rules, I think other people may look and say, oh, yeah, okay, it's okay. Rob's doing it, so it must be all right.
Mm-hmm. In reading your book, you touch on the fact that most people in our society are inherently good people. It's really important, I think, right now that we call on that inner goodness to say, yes, these are trying times, and there is an urge to become self-centered. But we really do owe it to ourselves and to society as a whole to remain true to our our values and system. I want to respond to something that you put on LinkedIn yesterday, where you talked about being in a store where all of a sudden there's a supply of hand sanitizer that comes available. What do you do? Do you buy it all? Do you buy only two? You gave 6 different options. What is the right answer here? Because there were a couple in there that I'm going, okay, well, I could buy it all and give it to a charity, or I could buy enough for some friends and whatnot. Where's the best way to act in a situation like that?
I'll set it up for you. I went into a grocery store. It's about to close. And as I'm shopping for a couple of items, I asked a guy who had a pallet who worked at the store, you don't have any hand sanitizer, do you? Thinking, of course, the answer would be no, because that's the answer you get everywhere, at least down here in the Bay Area. And he looked at me and said, we just got some in. Walked to the back of the store, came back, brought back a box that had 48 small bottles of hand sanitizer. Cut it open, put it on the ground in front of me, and walked away. And I'm looking at these bottles of hand sanitizer, and I've got a couple of kids, got a wife. We didn't have much hand sanitizer. I also know that this hand sanitizer is extremely valuable. What do you do in a circumstance like this? What's the ethical number of hand sanitizers to buy at $2 each, knowing that I'm sure they could be on eBay or Craigslist for 10 times that much? I don't think there is one ethical answer. I think that people who buy my book, thinking that they're going to get the answers to all of their ethical questions, like somehow I'm coming down the mountain with a couple of big stone tablets, I think will be disappointed. I think the point is that it's an ethical journey, and you should struggle with it a little bit. That you should think about the consequences of your actions, and think about what's right and wrong. And I think different people could fairly come to a different conclusion. One conclusion might be buy one, and then leave it for the other people. Another conclusion that someone suggested is buy all 48 and then go to a local retirement home and give them to the retirement home for free, because they probably need them or are at greater danger than you are. I bought 2 for each member of my family, knowing that the bottles were small, feeling that the 2 bottles would probably last us a few weeks each, and hoping that the supply chain would be restored in that time. I hope that it is. And left the rest for someone else. And look, maybe somebody came right behind me and bought the rest of them and put them on Craigslist. I don't know. I think each person has to figure it out for themselves in those circumstances. But I think what is an unethical move is simply to go to the worst base human instinct and buy all 48, hoard them, and figure out how much money you can make from them. I think that's to not think about the ethical implications of your actions. I think that is unethical.
Mm-hmm. Well, and how you act really does demonstrate where your real values lie. One of the fellows that I play tennis with, which is a game where you rely very heavily on the ethics of your opponent to make fair line calls. We were talking about ethics one day, and he said, it's only a value when you're willing to pay a price for it.
Right.
And
that's a great point. There's an element of integrity, I think, that involves self-sacrifice. Mm-hmm. Doing something that's not necessarily at least in your short-term interest. I'd argue that acting with integrity is always in your long-term interest. It may involve some sacrifice in the short run, like making a call that means you may lose a game in tennis, or in golf if you walk to your ball and the ball is in a divot or a hole. Might not be in your self-interest to play by the rules and try to hit it anyway, right? But I think having a reputation as someone that follows the rules and does the right thing and isn't known as a cheater, in the long run, I think inures to your benefit.
I agree with you. I think that if you want to be completely self-serving about this, you say, well, I'm going to act the way that I want the society that I live in to act. And so you could say it's in my own greedy self-interest that I'm doing the right thing.
Well, that's the message to companies. There's a great debate going on right now in the corporate world about stakeholders. For I think the entire 20th century, companies thought really that they had one stakeholder, and those were investors. Do what's right for the shareholder. If it benefits the shareholder, then it's the right thing to do. And I think that led to a lot of short-term thinking in corporate America. It became whatever is right for today's stock price, or whatever we need to do to hit this quarterly number, let's do it. What companies I think are now evolving to, and this is something the Business Roundtable put out just a couple of months ago, is actually companies need to think of themselves as having multiple stakeholders. They've got shareholders that they need to pay attention to. They're important. But there are other stakeholders that are important too. Employees need to be an important stakeholder. Your customers need to be an important stakeholder. Your community where you do business, they're stakeholders too. And whenever you make an important decision, you need to be thinking about how that decision will impact all of your stakeholders. It's hard to make a decision that will always benefit all stakeholders. Those are rare, easy decisions. But at least make a decision with an understanding of how it may have a negative impact on one of your stakeholders. And over time, make sure you take care of all your stakeholders. Having this multiple stakeholder approach may not be in the best interest of this week's number or this quarter's stock price, but in the long run, I think will actually benefit the stock price and ultimately make you a stronger company. So, doing the right thing, I think there's the phrase: there's value in values. You'll do well. You'll do better. In fact, there are studies that show that companies who chart an ethical course, who have a reputation for acting ethically, actually outperform companies that are perceived as unethical in the stock market. So I don't think it's a choice between being ethical and being successful. I think if you chart a course toward ethics in the long run, you will be more successful.
And I think even more so in a time like this, because you may think that you're skirting through or getting around something, but in the long run, the consequences will be devastating to your organization, all the people who work for it, and the community as a whole. I think
Right.
that's a really important point.
Look at the brands just in the last couple of years that have just been decimated by problems with ethics. Right? Look at WeWork. Look at the amount of value that WeWork got hit with when a number of issues came out around their proposed IPO. Facebook, Google, Uber, these are companies that it will take years, maybe decades, if ever, for their reputations to be restored.
So how we handle ourselves through this crisis and at all times really will matter in the short run and in the long run. Rob, thank you very much for taking the time to do this interview with us. I wish you all the best for your team at AirBnB as well. I'm sure that these are challenging times with such restrictions on travel. So all the best to you and to your team.
Okay. Thank you, Stu. Appreciate it.
Thank you.